Hello.
What day is it today?
Today is Saturday.
Saturday, April 8th.
April 8th.
1980. Okay, all right, so far so good. You know, we really should start getting your reminiscences and my reminiscences down on tape. Ned's been asking for that. What are your very, very first memories that you can remember? How old were you?
Well, my first memories are when I'd go down and open the gate from the road when Dad brought the big black stallion horse home from town. And I'd close the gate and he'd lift me on the horse's back while he led us up to the barn. And I hung on to the thing.
And you were riding that big black stallion?
About 3 years old.
And your mother standing on the front porch hollering at your dad?
I don't know how much of that we should bring in.
I think that makes sense from a father's point of view and a mother's point of view.
Well,
Your dad was pretty proud of you being able to sit up there on that big stallion, and your mother was scared stiff something would happen. Well, we'll let it go at that. Where else can you remember? What else can you remember?
oh, helping to milk the cows with my small souvenir milk pail.
It wasn't a state fair milk.
Well, no, long before those days. About 4 or 5 years old. They pick out an old cow that wouldn't kick.
Not enough energy left in her to kick, huh? What was the time that you were so scared by this toy on a Christmas Eve? What was that?
Well, we've been out in the country to the Christmas program, Christmas night, with TV sleigh and all, a wagon box full of hay and robes. And I got me a toy from Benny Rice for Christmas from Uncle Sam, sitting on the drums, imitating someone playing a harp with his hands up and down. And as the door slammed as we walked in the house, and the little tension that was left on the spring that warmed it up started it going again as we came into the empty house.
Scared you, huh?
Yep.
Okay, so far so good.
This is an arm now.
Mm-hmm. You want to see how our lighting is?
Well, were we both on the picture for sure?
I think so.
Huh?
We'll see. Is it still flickering?
Yeah, it was. Now it's,
Stop.
yeah, it's going yet.
Speak up.
It's flickering now. But I fear that
Well, this is practice session number 2.
yeah,
We're trying to get the lights coordinated so that we get the right amount of light on the picture.
I wonder if any light from those bolts that hits the lens, the reflectivity would interfere.
Oh, I don't think so.
Well, we'll see what we
Yeah.
get. It must be hitting it now, though, isn't it?
No,
Not at all?
no. Be reminiscing about something now.
Well, my first memories of big joys riding 2,000-pound black stallion from the road up to the barn while Dad led it up there. And I opened and closed the gate while he led it.
Let's see now. You were the baby of 10.
Yes.
And you had how many brothers?
I had 2 brothers and 7 sisters.
And how many of them were school teachers?
Well, Minnie and Julia and Josephine and Lillian and Evelyn went to business college and she worked at the bank at home. She went to school in Winona.
Nordall.
Nordall went, and Josephine went to Stout Institute. They graduated together in Menominee. Josephine taught her first year in a suburb of Chicago. And Nord was the youngest graduate to ever graduate from Stout Institute at 17 years of age and taught in the Annieville High School at 17 years of age.
Your dad must have really been a forward-looking man to be able to send all his kids to school at that time. Who went to River Falls? Minnie and Julia and Laura in 1908.
Laura and Minnie and Julia. You see, at that time, when you graduated from 8th grade, you could go to the county seat, and if you passed an entrance exam, you could enter the normal school for 2 years and then teach without going to high school.
Well, did you graduate from 8th grade after you were confirmed? You were confirmed in Norwegian, weren't you?
Yeah. About the same time.
And they had no high school in Strum.
They had 2 years.
Oh, in Strum?
Yeah.
Strum had a 2-year high school.
Yeah. And Louis Olson and Freddie Williamson and I took one subject of freshman year in 8th grade. Then we took 5 subjects in the freshman year. So we had 6 subjects out of the way.
That reminds me of my dad when he said he wrote for his 8th grade diploma when he graduated from 4th grade, and he only failed in 6 subjects. But they didn't go any further than 3rd or 4th grade.
No.
Oh, dear.
I doubt his mother went that far. Dad came out of officers training school in Oslo at 18 years of age as an immigrant to Wisconsin.
Well, they sure looked forward to their kids getting education.
And his trigonometry books and algebra books were the same as the freshman year at the University of Wisconsin. They were in Norwegian, of course,
Well, we've got some of his old copy books here.
Yeah,
His penmanship was absolutely exquisite.
well, there was no typewriting then, for sure.
No, he wrote so beautifully. Well, let's check again and see if we're coming through better this time.
Well, here comes the engineer, Orchard.
Oh, about your reminiscences, you're supposed to say something.
So now we'll go from Strum and Elmina to Hollywood.
Well, how old have we got you now?
Well, I will be...
Better start talking about going down to, when were all these escapades in Strum? After Pembroke or before?
Oh, before.
The escapades in Strum?
Yeah.
The chicken story and all that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe better tell the chicken story.
Well,
We'll dedicate this one to John Bennett. He's...
Strum, when the Democrats won out, and Strum was all Republican, and Strum was Norwegian, and Independence was all Democrats and Polish. They decided to change their politics and have a Democratic Victory Day at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning to bring all the Polish people to town. And they were going to throw 50 young chickens off the bank roof. Most of them was dollar bills. Held on a leg by a rubber band.
I thought you said one time that those chickens were kept in the front garage overnight and they were kind of groggy in the morning.
This is
The
it.
fumes.
They'd been on that cold, in a chicken crate on the cold floor in the Ford garage. And they weren't very lively. But Hubert and I were on the bank roof. And the street, you couldn't see the street for Polacks and Norwegians. And sure enough, they were there 8 o'clock in the morning, waiting for the 9 o'clock.
Festivities.
Yeah, chickens flown and thrown off the bank roof. Hubert threw a chicken at his girlfriend down there, with a dollar bill on its leg. And it hit her and her knocked her flat.
That was the end of that romance.
That was the end of that romance. As the chicken run down the street, and Robbie Store's coal chute window was open. He got a load of coal. And Alfred Anderson, the tightest man in 20 counties, took off after the chicken, and the chicken went through the coal chute window, and Alfred went right through the window right after the chicken had come out with the chicken and the dollar bill in his hand. He was just as black as a chicken. But it accomplished the purpose. You couldn't see the street for people.
Now let's see what else do I remember from you and Hubert and Roy's reminiscing. Hubert would tell about how they would come into town late at night after plowing in the fields, dead tired, and he'd walk 2.5 miles into town.
This was Halloween.
And on Halloween. And then they would hoist farm machinery up on top of...
Is that Vickery now?
Yeah. Hoist farm machinery up on what kind of roof?
Oh, on the shed roof.
On the shed roof, and work like dogs, and then walk all the way home, and that was fun. When did you run the bowling alley? When did you run the movie house and roller skating rink? And
that was during the tough years.
was that all before you went down to Pembroke?
No, that was
Okay, then
years.
maybe then after the victory dance we should go to Pembroke. How come you went down there?
Well, Strum didn't have a high school.
Well, you said it had 2 years.
It had 2 years, yeah. But you see,
You couldn't graduate. Yeah.
we had 6 subjects of the
Curriculum out of the way.
Yeah. So you had to go away the next year. So I went 1 semester in Mondovi and 1 semester in Aleba. So that took...
Were you kicked out of each one?
No.
Okay. How come you went down to Pembroke?
Well, I was about to quit school. So the tuition at Pembroke was $3,600 a year. So Nord called up home and talked to Dad and Minnie. And he said, you can come down here and work. We've got 7 passenger Cadillacs. You can wash them. And instead of $3,600 a year, we'll take them in for $300 a year. And he works for the race. So I was happy as a lark. He already had 4 or 5 boys working their way through, so I wasn't alone. In fact, the millionaire kids going to school there had less jingle in their pocket than I did.
Yeah,
Because the people that made it the hard way didn't spoil their kids with throwaway. money. But there's a different story with a lot of, after the old folks died off, and the kids acquired the money.
Maybe you should tell about the Field and Stream, or the medals that you won, not Stream, but what?
No,
In the sports
it was,
field.
it was, I run the 4 miles at bedtime in the spring around the golf course. There was 640 acres, 1 mile on each side. I didn't run that fast, but I really had a good wind. In fact, I run the quarter mile under 51 seconds my 3rd year in high school. That's not a bad record, state record. But I won I acquired the role, which you have to be a good high jumper. And I went up 5 foot 10 inches. I broad jumped right up around 20 feet. And run the quarter mile under 51 seconds. And I also won the 220. I won 4 firsts in 1 afternoon.
Which didn't give you much time to chase women, did it?
Well, there wasn't any time left for that. They had 8 7-passenger Cadillacs, and I watched them and never drove one morning and night. So that
Well, but some of the other benefits that you got out of being with Nordahl, he sort of polished you up and made a gentleman out of you, didn't he?
well, it was quite an experience.
Yeah.
When Al Jolson came to town, the multi-millionaire drugstore people, Cat's Drugstore, I picked Marvin and Jimmy up every morning. Their house was 1 block long, and they had 100 drugstores in the Southwest. But when something good came to town, they'd send their colored chauffeur out to pick me up, take me to the Schubert or the orchard. And when Christmas came, the nicest shirts I've ever owned I got from Mrs. Katz from the Floors. The ties to match. So those.
What were some of the other things you saw down there?
Well, Nard would take me to the Orpheum and to a good show about every other weekend. He didn't want me to get lonesome down there. And then on Saturdays, quite often, we'd go to a couple Cadillacs full of boys that boarded at school. We'd go to Lou's Wild's Biscuit Company, and then to the Stockyards Company's fishing net.
Field trips?
Yeah, in the industry. We liked the cookie companies because we got a lot of samples there.
Well, okay. You graduated from there then in 1927?
Yeah.
And then you went to...
I went to Kansas City Junior College, which is a branch of Missouri, for a year. I did some work at Pembroke, so I lived there free. And did some other work too. In the little thing.
Then came the Depression, and then you came home?
Yeah.
What year did you come home then?
Well, it must have been 28 or 9. 29. I'll let you know. See, let's go down and have supper at the
We can't afford it.
Oh, we can.
We're going... Well, hi again. We're now on vocation. for our next episode. This is my husband, Alton W. Holte. Recognize the camera, Alton. And we're going to try to pick up with some more of his boyhood memories. In talking about this, we realized that we had overlooked a couple pretty important episodes in his early life. Remember the time that Laura tells us how her wedding was postponed? Why was that? You were the star in that show too, weren't you?
Well, I caught pneumonia in the spring. It might have been late April. And it didn't leave me except in bed. And it was emphysema, I guess you call it. So the doctor had to come down from Eau Claire, cut off 2 ribs and drain the matter off my lungs.
Was this the operation that was done on the kitchen table?
Yeah. And honestly, the pain was so relieved, as they say, they drained off the cork and matter, that I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Not extra. So,
when did the man that was working there come in and bring you back to life?
well,
Was that before the surgery?
yeah,
or after?
that was before the surgery. And he started working my arms, legs.
You were turning blue.
Yeah. And that brought the circulation back.
But then they realized the seriousness of this and got the doctor specialist from Eau Claire.
Yeah, Dr. Matheson. He was the Matheson Middleford Clinic. He was Dr. Matheson. He came down and he had a nurse with him. And she gave me, on the 4th drop of chloroform, I was sleeping for the operation. That was some bad stuff to take. Wants to gag you.
Then when did you get the whooping cough? As you
After
were
the
recovering?
surgery.
After the surgery, then you got whooping cough.
And the country doctor was out to dress the surgery in the ribs. And while he had the bandage off, dress it, the 2 tubes that stuck right into my lungs, I hooped, and they flew right out of bed into the wall.
Outside of the room.
Yeah.
Well, that was really something. Well, I think they all thought they were going to lose little Alton. It was pretty serious. And Laura had planned on getting married, and she postponed her wedding because everybody stood around waiting to see how Alton would come out. But you came out of it.
Yep.
Did you do anything much in the line of skiing or sports or playing outside after
Oh.
that?
Oh,
Yeah. You felt pretty healthy then.
yeah, we'd start up on the hill behind the house, and then Nord and I built a ski jump inside of the hog patch, so we could jump over the fence and the hogs couldn't get out. And one time, coming down the hill, Dad called the hogs from the strawberry house up in the valley to come down to the house, the hog house, the feeding house. And just as I got down near my ski jump, the first hog crossed my path. My skis went under and I went over. And that was, I can hear him squeal yet. That was the beginning of pressed hand.
Now, these are supposed to be true stories. Is that a true one?
That is absolutely true.
Okay, we'll take you at face value, remembering that you say you are the best flyer in Struck. And you're the best one because you've had so much practice? Is that what they say?
That's what my brother told me. You had a lifetime of experience.
Well, good. No.
Yeah.
Well, let's see how we're coming along now. You had 1 year down in Kansas City at the junior college.
Yeah.
Then you came back up to Strum.
Yeah.
And then you stayed at the farm for a little while, right?
Yeah.
And you busied yourself in various types of managerial positions, such as the bowling alley, did you run the roller skating rink? You were head of the ski club. Were all those activities right in there then?
Yeah. I wasn't the head of the ski club, but I took care of the publicity for the papers for the tournament.
Yeah.
Because that was the only source of income for the skiers to get around.
How many members were there in that ski club?
Oh, we were about 30 members.
Really? And you took charge of all the publicity and advertisements and bringing in the money for the club?
For the tournament.
Oh.
We had 265 skiers from 6 states for an annual tournament.
And didn't you say one time that the parking lot was so full and traffic was held up? What was that for?
Well, that was the
For their tournament?
Yeah, that was.
Where did people come from? The cities and all over?
They came from all over. We had publicity in Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and we had people like Ralph Keenan and his 2 brothers from Salt Lake City. Coach of the, Ralph Keenan was coach of the U.S. Olympic ski jumping team. And he and his brothers Smeary and Corey came to our tournament at Strum as a feature attraction, together with George Cutler of Duluth, who was putting around the power with them. And as I went down to Strum for my job at Honeywell for their meetings out at the hill where we had a cabin and lights for night skiing, I asked the club if they would pay the round-trip fare of Ian and his 2 brothers from Salt Lake. And the club, with plenty of supporters among the farmers around there, said, "What are you waiting for?" So I called Salt Lake City from the cabin, and help answered out at a forestry camp. It said this was the first call on this line, which was finished after dark out here this afternoon. And I said, if you have your round-trip tickets in there in the morning to our tournament on the February 26th of this year, would you and your 2 brothers be there? He said, with the tickets here in the morning, we'll all 3 be there. Then I said, then as a grand finale to the tournament, will you 3 be 3 of 7 to finish the tournament with a triple diamond jump or double diamond jump, with you coming down first, Smeary and Corey together in a twin jump right behind you, then one of the Nelson brothers of our club, and then 2 more of the Nelson brothers with another twin jump, and then a seventh jumper right behind that, making a double diamond jump. 7 men in the air at one time. He says, we'll do that. And so, 80 acres of parking ground was covered with cars. The stories in the Milwaukee, Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul papers. In fact, the Dispatch put out a souvenir Western Wisconsin Sunday edition. It sent reps down there, the same as Russ Winnie from Milwaukee and whatnot, that afternoon. The 7 men in the air at one time came down and everybody stood. And that was the grand finale. It took 2.5 hours for the crowd to disperse from the plowed parking ground of 80 acres. And our banquet was so big we had to hold it in the auditorium of the high school at Osseo, the only place big enough to accommodate. What else have I on?
Oh, dear. I'm impressed even hearing it as many times as I have. Well, when did you get involved with either the movie house or the bowling alley? What did you do in those? Where did you hold those?
The movie house was closed down, and I just ventured to run it a while.
During Depression years?
During the Depression, to see if it could be rejuvenated, which wasn't very successful. On the bowling alley...
What kind of movies did you show, or who were the stars at that time?
I booked movies at the time.
Can you remember?
Yeah, one of them was of Norwegian origin, but it wasn't Norwegian dialect. It was Sigurd Bo's Pulitzer Prize winner, We That Go to by Chicken, the Kitchen Entrance. Beeson got chicken van.
Huh. Servant's Entrance. Huh?
Servant's Entrance.
But Sigurd Bo.
It was a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Was this where you showed Birth of a Nation?
No.
Tell about Birth of a Nation.
The Birth of a Nation was brought to Strum years before, and Dad was one of the contributors with the businessmen to bring it there.
Was it a Chautauqua event, or no?
No, it wasn't a Chautauqua event. The Chautauqua events were the Wisconsin Players.
Mm.
They were live. That was Louisville.
Okay, go back to this. How old were you when you saw Birth of a Nation?
The Birth of a Nation, Dad must have contributed to it because we sat on planks in a tent. And the film people brought it in with the old carbon arcs where they cranked the machine by hand and then changed films every 11 minutes.
How old were you then?
I don't believe I was over 5 or 6 years old.
It must have been around 1913, 1914.
Yeah, because the Dad took us downtown to the tent. And
did your mother go or just all you kids?
I don't recall whether Mother went or not. But I know that Lily, Evelyn, and I and Dad were there.
Don't you think you know if you're on the film? Yeah. Well, at least we got in Birth of a Nation. That made quite an impression on you at the time, didn't it?
Oh, I'd certainly love to see it again,
yeah.
Even in silence.
Well, we'll have to see if we can't track it down.
Another show at that time that was filmed was the shooting up at
Amory, Wisconsin.
Amory, Wisconsin. Who were the...
Oh, gosh, I can't remember.
Well, it doesn't matter. It was the logging interests. They were flooding the land. And I forget who got shot, whether it was the deputy or the daughter of the logger. Anyway, the land was flooded against the owner's wishes.
to get the logs to float downstream.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite my dad used to talk about that a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, they made a movie. The boys made a movie of it.
He did.
And they showed it since.
Okay, let's jump back up now again then to the bowling days. Did they actually have alleys? Where did they have the alleys?
Well, we had them in the Ed Olson's building. I had to cut a basement wall out to have enough feet because the alleys are 64 feet long. Then you have the 4-foot pit that's 68. Then you got the area that you started behind that, which is another 12 feet. So we had 2 alleys. And nobody around there had alleys.
Did you get pretty good at bowling?
No, I never got very good at it.
Well, who set the pins?
Well, we had
Automatic pin set?
No, the kids.
Oh.
We didn't have the automatics for them to work with. With I haven't set my hand. I bought the alleys and paid for them.
What did you have to pay for them?
I paid between $300 and $400 for the 2 alleys and a bunch of bowling balls and pins. And then I organized a league. And it was so busy as a novelty that it paid for itself within 30 days.
Well, that was a money-making proposition then.
Oh, yeah, I gave it to the community.
Oh, you gave it to the community. Oh. Well, you were very philanthropic in those days.
Well, it was fun to help the community.
Well, when did you, let me see, that covers the bowling alley and the movies. What about the roller skating rink?
Well, the hall was, the bank owned the hall. And it wasn't occupied otherwise, but they bought a lot of skates, matched pairs. So I run the skating rink, hopes of rejuvenating them.
Yeah. Well, you got pretty good at roller skating, though.
Oh, I got good at that. I could light on my head without hurting myself.
Forward, backward,
Oh, yes.
waltzing to it and everything
Yep.
else?
Oh, yes, back.
Did you have any music?
Oh, yeah, we had the phonograph.
Phonograph.
Well, we had the sound system of the movie theater that was defunct.
Goodness sakes. Well, then all this time, some of the time you were out batching it in the country? These were all Depression years.
It's working.
It surely is.
Well,
Have you any idea what year you went out to batch it? Was that your dad's attempt to get you out of all of these escapades in town?
no. Nick Crumlin wanted to kick a renter off the farm, and he knew that if we farmed it, it'd be farmed right. So I ventured to batch it in the wintertime. And then in the summertime, you could hire a couple for $20 a month then. So we did, and she kept house for her husband and for me.
Who kept house?
Well, a renter that we hired.
Oh, a lady renter?
Yeah, no, a man and his wife.
Oh. Uh-huh.
Sure.
Then one time somebody skied into the kitchen.
Well, no, I was, in the winter I'd be out there alone, batching it.
Yeah.
And so Roy Matson and Lars Olson and Ralph Gilbert, who run the bank of Osseo and Strum, they skied out there, and the snow was so deep, just up to the top of the porch. That is the steps. And I just opened the door and they skied right into the kitchen. But I had the coffee pot on, so they didn't suffer.
Didn't you say that you'd pick up the pail, the dipper out of the pail, and the pail would come along with it?
Well, that was in the coldest part of the winter.
Yeah.
We had 36 days below zero that one winter.
Okay, did you enjoy batching?
Well, I had a battery radio, but I had so damn much work to do with the cattle and horses and pigs.
How many cattle did you have?
Well, I had about 50 head.
No milkers.
Some, a few.
Milkers?
Yeah.
Too? And no milking machine?
Yeah, I run the milk machine with a gasoline engine. There was no lights out there other than a Aladdin lamp that I had.
Is that where you got used to going to bed at 6, 7 o'clock at night?
About 7, 8 o'clock at night.
Okay, then what? Did things get better, or did you decide there was better ways of living? Who decided that you should go down to the University of Madison?
Well, that was before I'd been down there before. But then there was milk was 60 cents a hundred. In later years, it went up to $14 an ounce. So you see, there was no profit.
Farming.
Poor cows.
No.
And
Well,
so after the second year, my dad said, "You want to try it another year?" I said, "I better pursue something in the line of the education that you spent money on me for." So I quit that and went up to Honeywell, and sure enough.
Well, wait just a minute before we jump into Honeywell. You did spend a year at school at the University of Madison.
Oh yeah.
Well, then say that.
Well, I spent a year there. I'd gone a year at Kansas City Junior College, which is a branch of Missouri.
Yeah.
I stayed at Pembroke after graduating there. And
Okay, but at the university, now what courses did you take?
electrical engineering.
Bonnie and Sweet Tea.
Oh yeah, Bonnie,
Oh,
Bonnie and Sweet Tea. I forgot that.
what is
Well,
it?
I enjoyed that course.
Say, Bonnie, this is for your sake.
Yeah, that was public speaking, which was fun.
What other classes, then after you've been there for a year, then you decided to quit and come home
Money couldn't buy a job.
and talk to your dad and decided you better come down to the city.
Yeah.
Well, now we're way up to 1937.
Well, you see, Ted Peterson won the Twin City Championship in ski jumping. 3 years in a row, the ski clubs in the cities didn't have gasoline money because they were so poorly run. And we had gasoline money at Strum because when we had a tournament, we'd have the 3 England brothers there, and of course we had our 5 Nelson brothers, the same as the Eshberlin had the 5 Vietella brothers. So we had features, and I took care of the publicity.
Yeah, but now you're up in the city looking for a job at Honeywell.
Well, but this was just prior to
Okay.
Ted Peterson skied for us down there. He won the Twin City Championship 3 years in a row. But they were so poorly managed in the cities, they didn't have gasoline money for the people that represented them, like Ted. So he skied for us because we had gasoline money out of our tournaments, which were well managed, and we had the good luck of good weather in the February weekend.
So then you came down to the cities and looked up Ted Peterson?
No, Ted never told me to come up and I could go to Honeywell and inquire. So I came up, stayed with them, went over to Honeywell, and they put me on the next day.
Well, tell how you stood in line.
I stood in line from 12:30 noon till 10 to 5. And at 10 to 5, Hawking, the employment man, hired one boy from North Dakota and myself, 2. And I asked Al later on, as he hired people, 20 a shift for me in my periscope department, how come he hired me when I applied? He said, because your application showed it wasn't beyond your dignity to accept whatever available to stay off the relief roll. And that's why I hired you.
Where did you start working then at Honeywell?
I started in the motor valve department. I worked for John McMillan from Ashland, Wisconsin. And he kidded me every noon. He was Irish. I enjoyed his sense of humor very much. So I asked him, oh, it was getting near the 17th of March, and I never talked back to him, but I kidded him. I said, Max, there's one thing you can't deny. He said, what's that? I said, you'll never catch the lutefisk where the river Shannon flows. He said, who the hell wants lutefisk?
Okay.
Nicest man I ever worked for.
Okay, let's stop here.
You haven't found the switch yet. Yeah. Besides, Bonnie, taking a sweet shit at the annual Beaux-Arts Ball at Madison. Betty Bizance, who became Max Conrad's wife, and I had rented the Sultan's outfit
For the Beaux-Arts Ball.
for the Beaux-Arts Ball, and she had the Queen of Sheba's abbreviated attire. And somebody was following us around with the movie camera, and we got in the finals of the dancing contest, and then we lost out in the finals. Orchard,
What?
you shut it off now.
Well, then you can see, and speaking of Max Conrad, this is a good place to...
And then speaking of Max Conrad, he and I held an air show in my dad's pasture at Strum. We had people with 32 airplanes down in the pasture one afternoon. And none of the states run a power line down there, and we had lights till midnight and flying.
Maybe some of the kids don't even know who Max Conrad was. He was the flying grandfather, wasn't
Yeah, Max was the flying grandfather of Winona. They had an aviation instruction school.
he? And didn't he used to land on the farm?
He
And all of
landed
you
down
rode
in
with him?
the pasture at Strum. And that's where we held our air show.
Your dad rode with him several times?
Oh, yeah, my dad rode with him a lot of times. Flew with him. He used the pasture for barnstorming.
Okay, I think now we can switch back to Honeywell.
Yeah.
You were working there. And how long did you work there?
Oh, I was at Honeywell many years.
And how many million women did you have during the war? No men.
Well,
You hired them off the street?
yeah. Well,
Well, tell a little bit about that. Those Honeywell years.
they couldn't ship the heater valves for the B-29s. And Ernie Buffington put me on them, and I finally solved the problem so they could ship. So then they got the Periscope contract, which was $120 million. And they gave me that department overnight. I think I was the most scared out guy in Minneapolis with that many people. But they never make a mistake. They send a guy up that's been around there 30 years to stay with you till you get both feet under you. And so they did that. Herb Gallier. I learned more in a week from Herb than I would have learned alone in a year. And then he had to go out because they needed him in other departments.
Did you board with,
I boarded with Ted and Ed, Ted Peterson and his wife.
Evelyn?
Yeah.
For many years?
No, for quite a while.
Then you got your own room or your own
Yeah,
apartment?
then
or?
my own room. Pardon.
And then where did you meet Vicky's
Well,
mother?
Huh?
Where did you meet Jean?
I had met Jean in Madison at a journal convention. Her friend of hers from Appleton was an acquaintance of Pat Cooney, who was my roommate. And so he was to get a blind date for his girlfriend's roommate, which was Jean Lehman. And that was, so he acquired me at a formal dinner dance at the Lorraine.
At the where?
Lorraine Hotel in Madison.
Yeah.
And so we all went to that, and that's where I met Jean. So we started corresponding.
When you came home then, and
Yeah.
she was still going to school.
Yeah.
Did you go down to Madison to see her ever, or?
She was not in Madison. She went to Minnesota. She was a representative of the Corona Club, Journalist Club of Minnesota University, to the convention in Madison.
I see, I see. Uh-huh. Well, then you went together for some years,
Oh,
didn't
yes.
you?
Yeah. Then finally I went to Honeywell and got employed there and stayed with Ted and Evelyn Peterson, and I started seeing her. She lived in West St. Paul. 322 West Annapolis Street.
Well, she was still at home with her parents.
Yeah. And she worked for the daily paper in St. Paul as a journalist. Now, where do we? At this time, we corresponded since we first met about, was it 29?
Oh, about 8, 9 years ago.
Yeah, 8, 9 years before, when money couldn't buy a job. But Ted Peterson skied for a club at Strum, and he won the Twin City Championship 3 years in a row because the Twin City clubs were so mismanaged they didn't have gasoline money for them, and we had that. So he skied for us at Strum, in spite of being the Twin City champion.
And you've covered that all pretty well.
Yeah.
You were going to say Jean was still living with her.
Jean
Was still living with her parents.
was still living with her parents at West St. Paul, and she was writing for the Minnesota Medical Association, glorifying Christmas seal sales and the radio script that she wrote. And, so I run an ad, wanted dairy farm in Twin City area, from private party to eliminate the real estate people. I got an awful lot of replies, and I looked at, I think 57 over the course of 6 months. And then I asked my dad where to go and look for borrowed money for land purchase, as we had saved up we got married, saved up $10,500. He said, go to the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company in the Rand Tower in Minneapolis and see Joanne Gullis, who I borrowed a lot of money from at times to buy farms off the bank to make them solvent. And they offered me the money. The same as Prudential. So we found this farm, went back, bought it for a little under $25,000. Then
At this time, Ned was how old?
at this time Ned was
Little
a year old, and we were expecting a second child, which became Mary. So we bought the farm, and we moved out here. And I bought 32 head of Minnesota Valley Breeders' Test Cows with an excellent production record of 500 pounds of butterfat as 2-year-olds, which assures you you'll have 700-pound 7-year-olds. So that was a profitable investment. Now,
Well, all this while then you were working at Honeywell and started to sell milking machines, right?
yeah, I started to sell milk machines on Saturday because by buying with my dad's backing, not direct buying, as borrowed, I was able to get them at a 46% discount on a $500 machine. And nobody else had machines for sale.
These were war years.
These were war years, yeah. But buying those quantities, I got delivered. And many a weekend, I'd go down there on Saturday. I advertised new and used milking machines, all makes. I traded for one of every other competitive make. Then I run the price of the used ones up to where I could sell the perfections, which gave me a 46% discount. So many a Saturday I came back with between $1,000 and $2,000 commission checks, because you had to have a racing certificate to buy a machine, and I had sourced them. So in buying cattle, I went to Minnesota Valley Breeders, who had the best average big herd, and they wanted to reduce their milking herd from 235 to around 200. So I got 32 head.
You had help then, didn't you, all the while to run the farm end of it?
Yeah.
You couldn't be working at Honeywell and selling milking machines and run the farm at the same time.
No, Evelyn knew a couple at Adeliva that needed a place, and so she directed me to eat.
Yeah.
And I moved them up here. They lived in the other part of the house and up 3 of the rooms upstairs.
Then we must be pretty close to coming to Jeannie's arrival, right?
Yeah. You mean daughter Jean?
Yeah, Eugenia.
Yeah, Eugenia. Yeah, she was.
Remember how they told about Mary riding her trike on the porch out here?
Yeah, Mary was riding her trike as a young girl every now and then she'd run off the porch. So they called her Bloody Mary because she was scarred up.
And what was Jeannie's claim to fame?
Well, Jeannie would like to comb my hair, and she would jiggle and enjoy it so.
Wasn't she also the one that thought, "Oh, Daddy, you are so funny"?
Yeah. She's the one.
She appreciated your Norwegian sense of humor. Well, we might as well bring the twins in here while we're at it.
Well,
Did you expect twins when they were born?
well, we
Suspected, huh?
sort of suspected it. And I took Jean in to the hospital, going through all the red lights, and Loretta called the hospital, and they had a wheelchair at the emergency entrance. I parked the car, and by the time I got upstairs, which I suppose was 6-7 minutes later, both Paul and Patty were born.
Remember bringing the twins home?
Then, as I saw them and talked to the doctor and everything was all right, I went home and I pulled up to the kitchen door, and here stood Ned and Mary and Jeannie and Loretta. What is, I said, a great big baby boy and a great big baby girl, and I can hear their scream of joy yet.
And what about the night you brought them home? Wasn't Aunt Grace here? Wasn't that quite a memorable night, too?
Yeah, that was quite a memorable night. We had them in the room upstairs, and an awful storm come up, and it blew the one front window in upstairs, and we stood there on broken glass,
Aunt Grace and you.
yeah, holding a blanket up in the open window. It wasn't blowing directly at us, it was blowing past the window, so we could keep most of the water from coming in. It didn't last too long.
Didn't the power go out, too?
There was a time.
Or was that another
Yeah,
time?
that was at the same time.
Funny thing, I remember it better than you do, and I wasn't there.
Yeah. Well, you heard me tell it.
Yeah.
The power went off, and we had the Caterpillar tractor fixed up so it could create vacuum for the milk machine, even with the power off. The vacuum from the intake manifold of the motor was enough. The source of it was enough to run 2 units of the milk.
Well, what did you do to keep the milk sweet that the babies were drinking and stuff like that? Didn't you?
I ran into town and got dry ice and put it in the top of the refrigerator.
And that's the wind and the storm that blew the big pine tree crooked out here, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the tribute to that night.
Yep.
The reason it's leaning today.
Yeah.
Well, why
and
did-
then for cooking, being we had electric stove, I went into Langola Hardware and got 2 sterno cans so we could cook. And I got dry ice from ice cream companies so we could keep the formula cold between feedings.
Well,
And the power was off a day and a half because this transformer was burned out.
well, things went along then with all 5 of the children and your wife out here. Busy and happy and enjoying life, and then Jean got sick.
Yeah.
Want to just say a little bit about that?
Well, she was ailing, and so the doctor suggested she come in for exploratory surgery
doctors came down right after the surgery. They told me it was a matter of 30 days for the cancer.
That must have been a terrible blow.
I often wonder if that were today, if they wouldn't have saved her life.
Hard to tell. But it had gone so far, but she really never was in that much pain. Seems to me, as I remember you're telling me, that she was bothered with gas. And she'd drink a little bit soda water and it would take care of her gas, and that was it.
That's what we hoped it was.
Yeah. But here come to find out that the cancer had invaded her internal organs almost completely.
Yep.
And there was just nothing they could do but repair the exploratory incision and bring her home.
Yeah.
And then she lived for what, just barely?
Just barely 30 days.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
And that's what the doctor wrote.
That's what he had said, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, it's flickering now.
Oh. See, that's
This is about the end of this chapter. Memories, memories, dreams of love so true. All these are memories, I'm drifting back to you. Childhood days, wild days, among the birds and bees. You left me alone, but still you're my own in my beautiful memories.